The auction block stood like a stage of human misery in the sweltering June heat. Sweat trickled down Solomon's back as he waited in the holding pen. His twisted left leg, bent at an unnatural angle since birth, throbbed with familiar pain. 26 years old, he'd already lived through 2 sales in his lifetime. This third one felt different, a growing dread spreading through him like poison. Next up, male slave, named Solomon, young but damaged goods, the auctioneer called out, gesturing for Solomon to hobble forward. The crowd's interest visibly waned. Eyes that had been eager to evaluate merchandise now looked through him as if he were already a ghost. Solomon stood as straight as his body would allow, his calloused hands and muscular arms telling a story his leg could not, that he was a worker despite his deformity. "Can't work the fields proper with that leg," a man in the front row commented loudly. "What good is he?" "Been trained in carpentry," the auctioneer replied without enthusiasm. "Starting bid at 300. Aye." The silence that followed carved another piece from Solomon's dignity. No hands raised, no interest sparked. 250 then, the auctioneer tried again, his voice betraying irritation. A lone hand finally rose at the back of the crowd. 250 to Mr. Blackwood. Any other bids? The auctioneer paused, scanning the disinterested faces. Sold to Mr. Blackwood for $250. Solomon's eyes sought out his new master, a tall man with steel-grey hair and a face weathered by sun and age. Standing beside him was a younger man, perhaps his son, whose expression conveyed only contempt as his gaze settled on Solomon's leg. "Get him in the wagon," Blackwood instructed his son, James. "We're heading back before nightfall." James approached, roughly grabbing Solomon's arm. "Move, cripple, don't make me drag you." The journey to Blackwood's estate stretched for hours along rutted roads. Solomon sat in the open wagon bed, exposed to the afternoon sun, his mind racing with questions about what awaited him. The other slaves they'd purchased, 2 women and another man, all field workers, kept their distance, as if his condition might somehow be contagious. As the wagon crested a hill, Solomon got his first glimpse of Blackwood Plantation. Unlike the grand mansions he'd seen from afar, Blackwood's house was modest, a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days. But surrounding it were extensive fields of cotton stretching to the horizon. And beyond the main house, Solomon could see the skeletal frames of new buildings under construction. "Expansion," the older Blackwood remarked, noticing Solomon's gaze. "Doubling our operation before next season. That's why I bought you despite that leg. Heard you know your way around wood and nails." "Yes, master," Solomon replied, his voice measured. "I was trained by Master Perkins' head carpenter from age 12. "Good. You'll be working under William. He oversees all construction." Blackwood's tone was matter-of-fact. "Just remember, I paid less for you because I expect less trouble. Understand?" Solomon nodded, knowing well what was meant by trouble. The wagon pulled up to the slave quarters, a row of crude cabins barely large enough for the families they housed. The air was thick with the smells of cooking fires and unwashed bodies. Children with distended bellies stared wide-eyed at the new arrivals, while adults kept their expressions carefully neutral. "James, get Wilson to show him where he'll sleep," Blackwood instructed, before turning back toward the main house without another glance. Wilson, a man with grey threading through his dark hair and eyes that had witnessed too much, led Solomon to his new home, a cabin barely 12 feet square, with a dirt floor and gaps between the wall planks that would let in the winter cold. 4 thin pallets lay on the floor, and Solomon realized he would have no bedding of his own yet. "That corner is yours," Wilson indicated. "Wake-up bell is at 4:30. Work starts at first light." That night, lying on the hard-packed dirt with only his threadbare shirt as a pillow, Solomon listened to the sounds of the plantation settling into darkness. His leg ached from the day's journey. and his mind raced with assessments and calculations. He had survived 2 previous masters by making himself valuable through his carpentry skills. Here, with massive construction underway, he might find not just survival, but a small measure of purpose. In his experience, purpose was the closest a slave might come to dignity. As moonlight filtered through the cabin's cracks, Solomon's fingers traced patterns in the dirt beside him, angles and joints, the silent language of building that had become his refuge. Tomorrow he would meet William, the construction overseer, and begin again the careful dance of proving his worth, despite his broken body. Chapter 2. The Value of Broken Things. Dawn came with the harsh clang of the plantation bell. Solomon was already awake, having spent the night drifting between fitful sleep and alert watchfulness. His cabin mates, Joshua, Marcus, Elijah, and Daniel, acknowledged him with guarded nods as they rose from their pallets. "You, the new carpenter?" asked Joshua, a powerfully built man with scars crisscrossing his back like a terrible map. "Yes, name's Solomon." "William's gonna work you hard," Joshua said, pulling on his frayed shirt. "He don't care about that leg." Solomon had expected as much. "I can work." The morning routine unfolded with mechanical precision. The slaves gathered outside for a meager breakfast of cornmeal mush before being divided into their work groups. Solomon waited, uncertain, until a broad-shouldered white man in his 40s approached. "You Solomon? I'm William, construction overseer." His eyes assessed Solomon clinically. "Master Blackwood says you're experienced." "We'll see. Follow me." William led Solomon to the eastern edge of the plantation, where the frames of several new buildings stood in various stages of completion. Men worked in teams, hauling lumber, hammering joints, and raising beams under the watchful eyes of white supervisors. "We're building 6 new structures, 4 slave quarters, an equipment barn, and a storage warehouse," William explained. "Behind schedule, because half my carpenters don't know a plane from a saw." Solomon took in the scene with a craftsman's eye, immediately noticing inefficiencies in how the men were working. Wasted movements, poor tool usage, incorrect techniques that would weaken the structures. "You'll work on finishing the interior frames of that quarter." William pointed to the most complete building. "Horace will show you the tools." The interior framing was shoddy. Joints improperly aligned, support beams inadequately secured. In some places, the structure wouldn't hold under the weight of a roof. Solomon set to work silently, correcting what he could without drawing attention to the previous workers' mistakes. By midday, when the slaves were allowed a brief rest and a cup of water, Solomon had made significant progress. While the others rested in whatever shade they could find, he studied the overall construction plans that William had roughly sketched in the dirt. "Something wrong with how we're building?" William's voice came from behind him, suspicious. "No, sir," Solomon replied cautiously. Then, taking a risk, he added, "But I notice the men are working harder than they need to." William's eyes narrowed. "Explain!" Solomon pointed to the dirt sketch. "The way you're having them raise the frames, it takes 8 men struggling to lift each section. There's a method I learned that requires only 5 men and places less strain on the joints." "Show me," William demanded, skepticism heavy in his voice. Using sticks in the dirt, Solomon sketched his alternative approach, a system of leveraged lifting that required fewer hands and resulted in stronger construction. William watched in silence, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn this?" he finally asked. "Master Perkins hired a carpenter from Boston to build his new study. I assisted him. He showed me many techniques." William considered this. "If it works, it would put us back on schedule." After a pause, he added, "You'll demonstrate tomorrow with the next frame. For now, get back to work." The afternoon passed in a blur of hammering and sawing. Despite his leg's constant pain, Solomon worked with precision and focus. When the evening bell finally rang, he had completed more than his expected quota. That night in the cabin, the other men regarded him with new interest. "Heard you been talking to William about new ways of building," Marcus said as they ate their evening ration of salt pork and cornbread. "Just trying to work smarter," Solomon replied. "My leg doesn't give me the choice to work harder." "Be careful," Elijah warned in a low voice. "Last slave who tried showing the overseers a better way to do something got accused of being uppity. 50 lashes. Solomon nodded, understanding the warning. Innovation was dangerous for a slave. It challenged the fundamental belief that they were intellectually inferior. The next morning, William had gathered a team to test Solomon's lifting method on the frame of the new warehouse. James Blackwood stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with obvious skepticism. "Your cripple thinks he knows better than my overseers," William had apparently told the younger Blackwood. Solomon demonstrated the technique using small-scale models he had fashioned from scrap wood during the early morning hours. The 5 selected men listened carefully as he explained the approach, their faces betraying a mixture of doubt and curiosity. "It won't work," James pronounced before they had even begun. "And when it fails, I want him punished for wasting our time." The first attempt was clumsy, the men unfamiliar with the coordination required. The frame tilted dangerously before they managed to stabilize it. James laughed derisively. "Again," Solomon said, making adjustments to their positions. "Joshua, you're the pivot point. Everyone moves on your count." The second attempt went smoother. By the third try, the team had lifted and secured the heavy frame section in less than half the time it would have taken using the old method. William's eyebrows rose in surprised approval. Even James's smug expression faltered. "Well," William said, "seems your cripple has some use after all." Over the following days, Solomon's technique was implemented across the construction site. Work that had been behind schedule began to advance rapidly. As the slave workers became proficient with the new method, Solomon introduced other refinements. More efficient ways to notch joints, techniques for aligning beams more accurately, methods for weatherproofing that would extend the life of the buildings. 2 weeks after his arrival at Blackwood Plantation, Solomon was summoned to the main house. He waited on the back porch, hat in hand, until Master Blackwood emerged. "William tells me you've revolutionized our construction," Blackwood said without preamble. "Says we're 3 weeks ahead of schedule now." "I just shared what I learned, Master," Solomon replied, eyes downcast. "From now on, you'll oversee all carpentry work. William will give you some authority over the slave construction crews." It was an unusual position for a slave, one that would place him in an uncomfortable middle ground, neither fully accepted by the other slaves nor respected by the white overseers. "Thank you, Master," Solomon said, "because it was expected." "Don't thank me," Blackwood replied coldly. "I'm not doing you any favors. I'm protecting my investment. Those buildings need to be finished before the harvest, and you're going to make sure that happens." As Solomon limped back to the construction site, he felt the weight of his new role settle upon him. Authority over other slaves was a poison gift. It created division and resentment, yet it also offered a small measure of protection and potential influence. That evening, as he explained his new role to his cabin mates, the atmosphere grew tense. "So now you're one of them?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with accusation. "No," Solomon replied firmly. "I'm one of us who's been put in a difficult position. I'll use it to make all our lives easier if I can." "Easier?" Joshua scoffed. "Nothing makes this life easier." "Less painful, then," Solomon amended. "Fewer whippings for falling behind, less back-breaking labor if we work smarter." Daniel, who had spoken little since Solomon's arrival, finally broke his silence. "My last master had a slave overseer, used the whip twice as hard to prove himself to the white men." Solomon met his gaze steadily. "I won't become that. You have my word." "Words from a slave don't mean much," Daniel replied, turning away. That night, lying awake as the others slept, Solomon confronted the treacherous path ahead. He had gained a precarious foothold that might lead to improved conditions, but it had already begun separating him from the other slaves. Isolation was dangerous. Solidarity among slaves was often their only defense against the worst abuses. Yet, in his new position, he would have access to information, to materials, perhaps even to decisions that could affect many lives. The question that kept him awake was not whether he could use that position to help others, but whether they would trust him enough to let him try. By late July, the construction projects had advanced remarkably. Solomon's position had evolved in unexpected ways. While technically still under William's authority, he now directed the daily work of 20 slave carpenters and laborers. His innovations had not stopped with lifting techniques. He had redesigned tools to make them more efficient, created jigs that allowed for faster replication of common components, and implemented a system of overlapping tasks that kept every worker productive without exhaustion. Master Blackwood had taken notice. During his weekly inspections, his initial skepticism had given way to reluctant approval. Even James, who had continued to refer to Solomon as the cripple, had been silenced by the undeniable results. "Your methods," Blackwood remarked during one inspection, "have saved me considerable time and money." "Thank you, Master," Solomon replied with appropriate deference, though he knew the savings had come at no benefit to the slaves who created them. "I'm considering expanding these techniques to other areas of the plantation," Blackwood continued. "The harvest approaches, and efficiency will be critical." This was the opening Solomon had been waiting for. "If I may, Master, I've observed ways the field work could be organized more effectively as well." Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "Bold of you to think you understand field work with that leg of yours." "Not the physical labor itself, Master," Solomon clarified quickly, "but the organization of it, the sequencing of tasks, the distribution of workers." After a moment's consideration, Blackwood nodded. "Write up your thoughts. William will review them." The instruction to write up his ideas confirmed what Solomon had suspected. Blackwood didn't know he could read and write. Few slaves were permitted such knowledge, as it was considered dangerous. Solomon had been taught secretly by his previous master's daughter, who had defied her father's rules out of a complex mixture of Christian charity and childish rebellion. That night, by the light of a small candle stub he had salvaged from the main house's trash, Solomon began documenting his observations and suggestions. His writing was careful and precise, each letter formed deliberately. The other men watched with expressions ranging from awe to fear. "They find out you can write, they'll whip you for sure," Joshua warned. "Master Blackwood himself told me to write it down," Solomon replied without looking up. "Still dangerous," Elijah muttered. "Knowledge they don't want us to have." Solomon paused, setting down his precious pencil nub. "Knowledge is the only thing they can't completely take from us once we have it." The cabin fell silent as the men considered this. Finally, Daniel spoke up. "Can you teach others?" he asked quietly. Solomon looked up, meeting each man's gaze in turn. Teaching slaves to read and write was illegal in South Carolina, punishable by severe penalties for both teacher and student, but in that moment, seeing the hunger in their eyes, not just for knowledge, but for the dignity it represented, Solomon made his decision. "Yes," he said simply, "I can teach you." Thus began the nighttime lessons. After the overseers had completed their final rounds, the men in Solomon's cabin would gather around as he drew letters in the dirt floor, teaching them the basics of reading and writing. Soon, men from other cabins began to join them, slipping in after dark, risking punishment for being outside after curfew. Solomon established strict rules for these secret gatherings, no more than 3 new men at a time. Absolute silence, a lookout posted at the window. If discovered, each man would claim he had come on his own to ask about the next day's work assignments. As July gave way to August, tension on the plantation increased. The approaching harvest meant longer hours and heightened scrutiny. Yet paradoxically, this pressure created more opportunities for Solomon's clandestine teaching. With the white men focused on production, the nighttime activities in the slave quarters received less attention. It was during this time that Solomon first heard whispers of the Underground Railroad. The phrases were coded, references oblique, but his growing literacy had sharpened his ability to detect patterns and meanings in seemingly innocuous conversations. "The North Star shines bright these nights," an older slave named Ruth remarked while serving the evening meal. "Yes, bright enough to light a path for those with courage to walk it," another replied. Solomon said nothing, but his mind raced with implications. The Underground Railroad, the secret network of abolitionists helping slaves escape to the north, was active in the area. The knowledge settled in him like a stone, heavy with potential and danger. That night, as the reading lesson concluded and the men returned to their cabins, Daniel remained behind. "You've heard the whispers," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question. Solomon nodded cautiously. "There are those making preparations," Daniel continued, his voice barely audible. "Come harvest's end, when attention turns to selling the crop rather than picking it." "Why tell me this?" Solomon asked, though he suspected the answer. "You have access, movement, trust from the overseers." Daniel's eyes bore into his. "And you have something else, a mind that sees patterns and solutions where others see only obstacles." Solomon felt the weight of unspoken expectations pressing upon him. "What you're suggesting is death, if caught." "And what is this, if not a slower death?" Daniel gestured to the cramped cabin around them. "You teach us letters, Solomon. Will you also teach us freedom?" The following day, as Solomon supervised work on the warehouse, William approached with unexpected news. "Master Blackwood is hosting several neighboring plantation owners next week," the overseer informed him. "He wants to demonstrate your building methods. You'll present them yourself." Solomon concealed his surprise. Slaves rarely addressed gatherings of white men directly. "As master wishes." 3 days before the demonstration, James Blackwood appeared at the warehouse construction site, accompanied by a stranger, a well-dressed man with cold eyes and a ledger book. "This is Mr. Hayward," James announced to William. "He's interested in purchasing some of our methods for his clients' plantations in Mississippi." Solomon, working nearby, felt a chill at the word purchasing. Not hiring or learning, purchasing, as one would buy a tool or a technique, or a person. That evening, Solomon was summoned to the main house. He waited in the study, standing perfectly still, despite the agony in his twisted leg after a long day's work. When Blackwood entered, he was not alone. Hayward accompanied him, along with James and 2 other men Solomon didn't recognize. "Demonstrate the lifting technique," Blackwood ordered without greeting. Using small wooden models he had prepared, Solomon explained the principles behind his methods. The men watched with calculating eyes, occasionally making notes or exchanging glances. "And where did you learn this?" one of the strangers asked. "I adapted it from techniques I observed, sir," Solomon answered carefully, avoiding mention of the northern carpenter who had been his primary teacher. "Remarkable that a slave could develop such innovations," Hayward commented to Blackwood, speaking as if Solomon were not present. "Perhaps there's a market beyond the methods themselves." Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but his eyes flickered with interest. "We can discuss that privately." After the demonstration concluded, Solomon was dismissed. As he limped back toward the slave quarters, The implications of what he had overheard crystallized into a horrifying realization. They weren't just interested in his methods, they were considering selling him as a trainer to implement these techniques on other plantations. Such a sale would tear him away from the community he had carefully cultivated, from the men he was teaching to read, from whatever fragile plans might be forming around the whispered promise of the Underground Railroad. When he returned to the cabin, Daniel was waiting alone, his expression grave. "They're going to sell you," he stated. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" Solomon asked, lowering himself painfully to his pallet. "Ruth works in the house. She overheard them discussing price." Daniel's voice was tight with urgency. "It changes our timeline. We must move sooner." "When?" Solomon asked. "2 nights from now. During the dinner Master is hosting for the cotton buyers." Daniel's eyes searched his face. "Are you with us?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with consequence. Everything Solomon had built at Blackwood Plantation, his position, the trust he'd earned, the small improvements he'd won for his fellow slaves, all would be abandoned. Yet what awaited him if he stayed? Sale to strangers, separation, his skills used to extract even more labor from other enslaved people. "Yes," Solomon finally whispered, "I'm with you." The next day passed in a fog of preparation disguised as routine work. Solomon gathered what supplies he could without arousing suspicion. A handful of nails hidden in a pouch sewn into his pants, a small knife appropriated from the tool shed, dried corn saved from rations. Each item was a tiny rebellion, a step toward a freedom he could barely imagine. That night, the final reading lesson took place. Only those who were joining the escape attempt attended. Solomon taught them not letters this time, but directions, north by the stars, landmarks to seek, dangers to avoid. "Remember," he told them, "we travel only by night. During day we hide. No fires, no talking above whispers. If we're separated, continue north, always north." As dusk approached on the night of their planned escape, James Blackwood appeared at the warehouse with unexpected news. "You," he pointed at Solomon, "Father wants you to demonstrate the techniques during the dinner, not just before it. You'll serve as an example of proper slave education." Solomon's stomach clenched. Being present during the dinner would make slipping away unnoticed impossible. As Solomon followed James toward the main house, thunder rumbled overhead. The approaching storm might provide cover for their escape, but it would also make travel more difficult, especially for him with his impaired mobility. Solomon was positioned in the corner of the dining room, instructed to remain silent until called upon to speak about his building methods. Through the window he could see the storm intensifying, rain now falling in sheets. The escape would be happening soon, with or without him. Then, as if in answer to unspoken prayers, an opportunity presented itself. A loud crack of thunder was followed by sudden darkness as the storm knocked out the oil lamps. In the confusion, Solomon felt a hand grasp his arm, Ruth, who had been serving at the dinner. "Kitchen door," she whispered. "Now," without hesitation, Solomon followed her through the darkness, limping as quickly and quietly as his leg would allow. They slipped through the bustling kitchen, where slaves hurried to find candles and restart lamps. Once outside, Ruth pointed toward the north field. "They're waiting by the old oak. Go now, before the lamps are relit and they discover you missing." Solomon grasped her hand briefly. "Come with us." She shook her head, rain plastering her grey-streaked hair to her face. "My grandchildren are in the nursery. I won't leave them." With gentle firmness, she pushed him toward freedom. "Go. Make your life mean something." The first week of their journey north unfolded in a blur of exhaustion, vigilance, and narrow escapes. They travelled only at night, navigating by stars when the skies were clear, by Solomon's memorized landmarks when clouds obscured their celestial guide. By day, they hid in swamps, dense forests, and once in an abandoned barn where they slept fitfully, jumping at every creaking board and rustling leaf. Their group had dwindled to 6. 2 men had separated from them on the 3rd night, believing they could make better time on their own. Solomon had given them directions and a blessing, knowing he might never learn their fate. 30 miles to the first station, Solomon had told them at the outset, but the direct route was impossible. They zigzagged to avoid settlements, doubled back when they spotted patrols, and spent precious hours finding safe crossings for swollen streams. On the 8th night, disaster nearly found them. As they skirted the edge of a small town, lanterns appeared on the road ahead, a patrol of 6 white men with dogs. The fugitives froze, then scrambled for cover in the underbrush. "The creek," Solomon whispered urgently. "Water masks our scent." They splashed into the shallow water, moving upstream against the current to further confuse the dogs. Solomon's legs screamed in protest at each step on the slippery creek bed, but fear drove him forward. For nearly an hour, they waded through frigid water until they were well past the town. When they finally emerged, shivering and drained, Joshua turned to Solomon with newfound respect. "How did you know about using the water?" "Read it in a book," Solomon replied, wringing water from his tattered shirt. "Master Perkins had accounts of frontier life. Hunters used the same trick to evade hostile tribes." Daniel shook his head in wonder. "Your reading saved us tonight." "Knowledge always finds its use," Solomon said quietly. "That's why they fear it in our hands." By the 10th day, their supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. That night, Solomon and Joshua approached a small farmhouse to gather food while the others waited in the woods. The small garden yielded potatoes and carrots that they harvested silently, and a chicken coop provided 2 eggs. As they crept back toward the woods, Solomon noticed a clothesline with several items swaying in the night breeze. Their own clothes were in tatters, instantly recognizable as belonging to fugitive slaves. "We need those," he whispered to Joshua, indicating the garments. The stolen clothes were divided among them. They wouldn't withstand close inspection, but they provided a thin disguise that might make the difference between freedom and capture. On the 14th day, they reached the edge of a larger settlement that they couldn't circumvent. A river crossing lay beyond it. They would have to pass through town, something they had avoided thus far. "We can't all go together," Solomon decided. 6 black men traveling in a group will draw immediate suspicion. They divided into pairs, Solomon with Daniel, Joshua with Marcus, Elijah with Thomas. Each pair would cross the town separately, using different routes, and reunite at a designated spot north of the settlement. Solomon and Daniel waited until dusk before approaching the town's southern edge. They adopted the posture and manner of free blacks on legitimate business, not too subservient, but careful to show proper deference to any whites they encountered. Solomon had fashioned a crude walking stick from a branch, which both aided his mobility and made his limp appear the result of a recent injury rather than a lifelong condition. Daniel carried a small bundle of their provisions, looking for all the world like a laborer returning from a day's work. They had nearly reached the northern edge of town when a voice called out behind them. "You there, boy with the limp?" Solomon's heart froze, but he turned slowly, keeping his expression neutral. A white man in a sheriff's uniform stood a few yards away, hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "Yes, sir?" Solomon replied, his voice carefully modulated. "Haven't seen you around before." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Where you boys headed?" "North to Columbia, sir," Solomon answered with the story they had prepared. "Our master sent us to deliver a package to his cousin." He gestured to Daniel's bundle. "And who might your master be?" "Mr. Jameson, sir, of Willow Creek Plantation." The sheriff studied them for a long moment. Let's see your papers." It was the moment they had dreaded. Escaped slaves had no travel papers, no written permission to be away from their plantations. Discovery meant return to bondage at best, severe punishment, or death at worst. "I apologize, sir," Solomon said, his mind racing. "Master Jameson gave the papers to Thomas, who travels ahead of us." The sheriff's hand tightened on his pistol. "That's so. Funny thing is, I know every plantation within 30 miles. Ain't no Willow Creek, and ain't no Master Jameson." Time seemed to slow. Solomon saw Daniel tense beside him, preparing either to flee or fight. Neither option promised survival. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice joined the conversation. "Sheriff Taylor, I see you've met my delivery men." A white man in his 50s, respectably dressed, approached from the direction of the general store. His expression was pleasant but authoritative. The sheriff turned, clearly recognizing the man. "Mr. Richardson, these your workers?" "Contracted for the delivery, yes." Richardson nodded affably. "My regular man broke his arm, so I had to hire these fellows from Columbia. They're free blacks with proper papers." He turned to Solomon. "Which, I assume you've shown the sheriff." Solomon caught the almost imperceptible nod from Richardson. "Was just explaining, sir, that our papers are with our companion, who went ahead to secure our lodging for the night." Richardson clicked his tongue in disapproval. "Careless. Well, I can vouch for them, Sheriff. They're delivering goods to my store from Columbia." The sheriff remained suspicious, but was clearly reluctant to challenge Richardson, who appeared to be a man of standing in the community. After a tense moment, he stepped back. "See, they don't linger in town, Mr. Richardson. Folk are nervous with strange Negroes about, what with all the runaways lately." "Of course, Sheriff. They'll complete their delivery and be on their way." When the sheriff had walked away, Richardson turned to them with a grave expression. "Follow me. Don't speak." Having no real choice, Solomon and Daniel followed the man to a modest, two-story building with a sign identifying it as Richardson's General Goods. He led them through the store to a back room filled with crates and barrels. "You're running from Blackwood Plantation," Richardson stated once the door was closed. It wasn't a question. "Peace," Richardson raised his hands. "I'm a friend, part of the network you're seeking." "How did you know?" Solomon asked carefully. "Word travels. 6 men, one with a pronounced limp. Blackwood's offering $200 for each of you, $300 for you specifically." Richardson nodded toward Solomon. "Says you're a carpenter with valuable knowledge." "We have companions," Daniel said, still wary, but sensing truth in Richardson's manner. "2 more pairs coming through town tonight." "I know. My associates are watching for them." Richardson moved to a trap door, concealed beneath a large rug. "You'll wait in the cellar until we can move all of you safely." The cellar was small, but clean, with pallets for sleeping and shelves stocked with preserved food. A single oil lamp provided dim light. Most importantly, it was hidden and secure. "The Underground Railroad," Solomon whispered as Richardson closed the trapdoor above them. "It's real. As real as the ground beneath your feet," Richardson confirmed, "and you're now part of it." Over the next several hours, the remaining 4 men were brought to the cellar. Joshua and Marcus had crossed without incident, but Elijah and Thomas had nearly been caught by a group of drunk white men leaving the tavern. Another of Richardson's associates, a young white woman introduced only as Mary, had created a distraction that allowed them to escape detection. "You'll rest here tonight?" Richardson told them when all 6 were safely hidden. "Tomorrow night, we move you to the next station, 15 miles north." "Why are you helping us?" Solomon asked. "You risk everything, your business, your freedom, your life." Richardson's expression grew solemn. "I was raised to believe slavery was God's will, accepted it without question until my travels took me north. where I heard arguments against it that I couldn't refute with honest heart. Now I do what conscience demands, though it makes me a criminal in the eyes of my neighbors. For 2 weeks, they moved from station to station, traveling by night in various conveyances, wagons with false bottoms, carriages with hidden compartments, and once aboard a small boat that carried them upriver under a shipment of grain. Each station brought them closer to the north, each conductor risking their safety to guide them toward freedom. Solomon observed everything with keen attention, memorizing the architectural features that made these hiding places effective, the clever false walls, the ventilation systems that prevented suffocation while remaining undetectable, the concealed entrances and exits that allowed for quick escape if necessary. "You have a builder's eye," remarked a conductor named Harper, as Solomon examined a pivoting bookcase that concealed a small chamber. "Notice how the mechanism is hidden within the decorative molding." "Ingenious," Solomon agreed. "I'd have added a secondary release mechanism accessible from inside, though. Safety and redundancy." Harper studied him thoughtfully. "Your skills would be valuable to our cause." By early October, they crossed into Pennsylvania, free soil at last. The legal danger wasn't entirely past. The Fugitive Slave Act meant they could still be captured and returned south. But with each mile northward, that danger diminished. Their group would soon separate. Joshua and Marcus intended to continue to Canada, where British soil offered more definitive protection. Elijah had family in New York who had purchased their freedom years earlier. Thomas planned to seek work in Philadelphia, where a community of free blacks might offer anonymity and opportunity. Daniel and Solomon had made no definite plans, having focused solely on escape until now. As they sat in the home of a Philadelphia abolitionist who had offered them temporary shelter, the question of the future loomed large. "What will you do now?" Daniel asked as they watched the sun set from the window of their attic room, the first time they'd been able to look openly at a sunset in months. Solomon considered the question. Freedom was still an abstract concept, its possibilities both exhilarating and terrifying. "I know only carpentry," he said finally, "but I'd like to build something worthwhile with it now." Harper's suggestion came back to him that his skills could serve the cause of liberation. The Underground Railroad needed safe houses, hiding places, clever concealments. Who better to design them than one who had experienced their necessity firsthand? "I'm thinking of staying connected to the network," Solomon continued, "using what I know to help others find their way north." The following day, their host introduced Solomon to a prominent member of the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee, a group dedicated to assisting fugitive slaves. The man, a successful black carpenter named James Needham, had himself escaped bondage 20 years earlier. "I understand you have considerable skill," Needham said after hearing Solomon's story, "and innovative ideas about construction." "I developed techniques to work more efficiently," Solomon explained. "My master saw it as increased productivity. I saw it as reduced suffering for my fellow slaves." Needham nodded in understanding. "And now, how would you use those skills in freedom?" "To create safety for those still making the journey," Solomon replied without hesitation. "Hidden rooms that can't be detected, escape routes that appear as normal architectural features, ventilation systems that sustain life without revealing presence." "Ambitious," Needham commented, but his expression was approving. "And dangerous work." "I'm familiar with penalties," Solomon interrupted, his hand unconsciously moving to a whip scar visible at his collar. "I've paid many already." After a long moment, Needham extended his hand. "My workshop always needs skilled hands. The pay is modest but fair, and some of our projects extend beyond ordinary carpentry." Solomon accepted the offered hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own, the physical testament of a craftsman's life. "When can I begin?" "Tomorrow," Needham replied. "There's much to build." That night, Solomon sat alone by the window of the attic room, watching the stars that had guided their journey north. Daniel had decided to join Thomas in seeking work in the city, their paths diverging but not ending. Solomon's twisted leg ached, as it always did at day's end. The pain was familiar, almost a comfort in its constancy, a reminder of all he had overcome. In slavery, his deformity had marked him as less valuable, an unwanted cripple. In freedom, it would be part of his strength, a unique perspective that informed his understanding of vulnerability and resilience. He thought of Blackwood Plantation, now hundreds of miles behind him. By now, the harvest would be nearly complete, the cotton bound for northern factories, where it would be transformed into fabric, much as Solomon himself had been transformed by his journey. Freedom, Solomon now understood, was not merely the absence of chains, but the presence of possibility. It was the right to build one's own life with purpose and dignity. As dawn broke over Philadelphia, Solomon rose from his restless contemplation. Today, he would begin again, not as property to be valued or discarded based on his utility, but as a man whose skills and knowledge were his own to direct. He would build secret rooms and hidden passages. He would create safe harbors for those still making the perilous journey from bondage to freedom. He would design and construct, not for the profit of masters, but for the liberation of the enslaved. The unwanted cripple had found his worth not in the judgment of those who had owned him, but in the courage to claim his humanity and the determination to extend that same opportunity to others. There was a powerful justice in that transformation, an architecture of freedom built from the tools of oppression. Solomon limped toward the new day, his uneven gait no longer a mark of shame, but a testament to endurance. Behind him lay captivity. Before him stretched possibility, unmarked and unwritten. It was his to build.